The lights were blinding, the kind that made every heartbeat feel televised. Across the glossy studio floor, camera crews adjusted lenses while the audience murmured behind the on-air sign. At center stage sat Ethan Walker, the sharp-suited host of The Exchange, a nationally syndicated talk show famous for taking apart celebrity guests and small business hopefuls. Beside him, framed perfectly in the shot, was Derek Coleman, 38 years old, calm posture, the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to measure his words before using them as weapons. "Let's get real for a second," Ethan began, flashing the kind of smirk that sold ad slots. "Mr. Coleman, you're claiming your company EcoFuse Technologies built a renewable energy grid that could power entire neighborhoods. But critics say your so-called breakthrough is just recycled ideas from bigger firms." A polite ripple of laughter came from the audience. Derek didn't move. His charcoal gray suit was crisp, his hands folded lightly, the only sign of tension the pulse that flickered at his temple. He'd been warned this host liked ambushes. He hadn't been warned how personal they'd get. Ethan leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Come on, Derek, isn't it true you used government grants meant for community projects to fund your own luxury office? There's a photo of you standing next to a Tesla with custom plates column in one. That doesn't exactly scream social responsibility." The words hung in the air like bait. Derek let the silence stretch 5 seconds, 10 until the laughter died down and the crowd began to shift uncomfortably. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, deliberate, the kind that made people lean. "I drive the same car I bought after 10 years of working 80-hour weeks," he said. "But if you want to talk about responsibility, Ethan, let's talk about how your network edits every segment on Black entrepreneurship down to 30 seconds unless someone's being arrested." The studio fell quiet. Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Derek continued, eyes steady. "You've done 14 shows this season on America's New Innovators. Out of 43 guests, not one was black. When we asked for equal coverage, your producers called it race baiting. So no, this isn't about a car, it's about coverage." Gasps rippled through the audience. The teleprompter operator froze. Behind the cameras, Laura Bennett, the senior producer, gestured frantically to cut to commercial, but Todd Franklin, the director, whispered, "Keep it rolling." Ratings trumped damage control. Ethan tried to recover, laughing thinly. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a factual one," Derek replied. "Your viewers can check your guest list online. Transparency works both ways, right?" The host's smile faltered. For a moment he looked genuinely lost, like someone who'd spent years holding the mic and suddenly realized it could record him too. He straightened in his chair. "So you're saying this show is racist?" "I'm saying bias hides best when it's disguised as curiosity," Derek said, voice cool as glass. "But the good news is sunlight's free." The audience burst into uneasy applause, some in support, some out of instinct. Ethan's jaw tightened. He glanced off camera toward Laura, who mouthed, "Move on," but Derek had already taken control. "I came here to talk about renewable energy," he said, turning back to the cameras. "Turns out the energy that needs renewing is right here in how we talk about who gets to build America's future." Before Ethan could respond, Todd's voice cracked through the earpiece. "We're live, Ethan. Don't cut. Ratings are spiking." Ethan forced a laugh. "Well, you certainly know how to make headlines, Mr. Coleman." "I don't make headlines," Derek said evenly. "I make power. Headlines fade, power sustains." For a full beat, the studio sat in stunned silence. Then the red light on the main camera blinked out commercial break. The moment the feed cut, Ethan ripped off his microphone. "Who approved this segment? He just hijacked my show." Laura hurried over, voice low but urgent. "We're trending already. Twitter's melting down. You humiliate him now, will look worse." "Humiliate me?" He accused the network of discrimination on live TV, "which means every news outlet will quote him word for word," she replied. "Congratulations, Ethan. You just gave him the biggest platform of his career." Across the stage, Derek calmly removed his mic pack and thanked a crew member. His composure was almost infuriating. No victory grin, no gloating, just quiet certainty. Tyrone Ellis, his assistant, waited near the exit doors holding Derek's leather portfolio. "You good, boss?" he whispered. Derek nodded. "Better than he is." They walked out under the glare of fluorescent hallway lights. Behind them, the studio erupted in frantic chatter. Producers scrambled to spin statements. Interns typed furiously as phones buzzed with incoming alerts. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation hit social media. Coleman Clapback trended across every platform. Some viewers called Derek arrogant. Others called him a hero. But no one could stop replaying that single line. Bias hides best when it's disguised as curiosity. By nightfall, the exchange had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. In a high-rise office 30 blocks away, Robert Hale, the network executive, slammed his fist on the conference table glass. "Find out how this happened. Now." Beside him, Greg Lawson, the network's in-house lawyer, scrolled through the viral clip on his tablet. "It's everywhere, sir. Every outlet picked it up. CNN's running it under Entrepreneur Confronts Bias on live TV. We're trending number 2 worldwide." "Number 2? Hale snapped. "Number 1 is a cat riding a Roomba," Greggy muttered. "But that could change any minute." Laura entered the room, her expression tight. It wasn't staged, he just pushed back. "Pushed back?" Hale repeated. "He dismantled our flagship host in under 4 minutes. Find out who this guy really is. Where's he from? Who funds him? What skeletons he's hiding? If we can't discredit him, we'll drown in think pieces by morning." Laura hesitated. "Sir, he's clean. Degrees from Howard and MIT, background in engineering, multiple patents, community projects in Detroit, Atlanta, Houston. He donates half his profits to youth STEM programs. So he's a saint now?" "Worse," Greg said grimly. "He's a credible saint." While network strategists panicked, Derek Coleman sat alone in his modest apartment overlooking the Harlem skyline. He wasn't celebrating. He was remembering. Years ago, he'd stood in a crowded workshop surrounded by humming motors and recycled metal. EcoFuse had begun there with a $2,000 grant, 3 volunteers, and a stubborn idea that clean energy shouldn't be a privilege. His first investor, Clarence Boyd, had told him something he never forgot. "If you ever get the mic, son, don't waste it defending your worth. Use it exposing their blindness." Tonight, that advice echoed louder than ever. A text buzzed from Clarence himself. "You handled yourself like a soldier, but they're coming for you now. Be ready." Derek stared at the screen. He already knew. The system didn't forgive men who broke the script. By morning, headlines split down the usual lines. Business Insider. Entrepreneur exposes media bias in live clash. Daily Chronicle. Arrogant guest hijacks TV show. Cable panels replayed. The Moment with slow-motion analysis, every gesture dissected. On one network, Ethan Walker appeared for damage control. "Look, I ask tough questions to everyone," he insisted, his voice tight beneath the makeup. This wasn't about race, it was about accountability. A clip of his words juxtaposed against Derek's calm reply made him look even worse. Commentators noted the irony of a man preaching accountability while dodging it live. Meanwhile, in Detroit, high school students posted a video outside one of EcoFuse's solar hubs holding signs, "Power to the people, thanks Derek." The video went viral again. Within 24 hours, Derek's inbox overflowed with speaking invitations. Universities, nonprofits, and tech forums wanted him on their stages. But so did the detractors' talk shows looking for round 2. Tyrone read the emails aloud from his laptop. Fox Line News wants a follow-up debate. A podcast called Straight Talk with Todd offered you a 2-hour slot. And, Ethan Walker's producer just emailed. They want you back next week. Derek raised an eyebrow. To apologize or to ambush? Probably both, Tyrone said. Then we accept, Derek replied. Tyrone looked stunned. Wait, what, after what they pulled? Exactly because of what they pulled, Derek said. If you run from the table, they own the story. If you sit back down, you rewrite it. Ethan Walker paced his dressing room, face buried in his phone. His mentions were a battlefield, half calling him brave, half calling him biased. He'd built his career on dismantling guests, not becoming one. When he looked up, Robert Hale was standing in the doorway. "You're trending for the wrong reasons," Hale said flatly. Ethan gestured helplessly. "He blindsided me with the race card." "The only thing he played was the truth," Hale shot back. "Your lucky advertisers haven't pulled yet." Ethan's face reddened. "So what, you want me to apologize?" "I want ratings," Hale said. "And nothing drives numbers like a rematch." He's agreed to come back. Do it live. Keep it civil. And for God's sake, don't lose control again. Ethan swallowed hard. "And if he does it again?" "Then you smile," Hale said, turning for the door. "Because the country will be watching." That night, Derek met with Andre Gates, his longtime friend and early investor, at a quiet diner off 7th Avenue. Andre slid into the booth, eyes wary. "You sure you want to go back on that show? They'll edit you into a villain before the credits roll." Derek stirred his coffee. "Let them try. I've lived the edit my whole life, the one where we build the dream. They cut the part where they took it." Andre sighed. "Then at least go in armed." Derek smirked. "Knowledge is armor. I've got plenty." He pulled a folder from his briefcase, public data, advertising breakdowns, sponsorship lists. Each chart told the same story: underrepresentation cloaked in excuses. "When they ask about emotion," Derek said, tapping the folder, "we'll answer with evidence." Andre nodded slowly. "Then America's about to see a masterclass by Kia." Midweek, the narrative had shifted. Editorials began calling Derek the voice corporate media didn't see coming. Clips of him mentoring young engineers resurfaced, painting a fuller picture than any pundit could. Meanwhile, Ethan Walker rehearsed in front of the mirror, repeating lines crafted by network PR. "We value all perspectives." The exchange stands for open dialogue. My goal was never to silence anyone. But when he looked into his own reflection, even he didn't believe it. The rematch was scheduled for Friday Night Live, prime time. The tagline, Part 2, The Conversation. America started. Every major outlet teased it as must-see television. Ethan wanted redemption. Derek wanted reform. Only one would leave with both. On the eve of the broadcast, Derek stood on his apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker below. Tyrone joined him, holding a phone glowing with new messages. "You've got every news anchor in America calling," Tyrone said. "Half want to praise you, half want to trap you." Derek looked out at the skyline. "They can't trap what's already free." Tyrone smiled faintly. "You think America's ready for what you're about to say tomorrow?" Derek's answer was quiet but sure. "Ready or not, they asked for a conversation. I'm just finishing it." The night wind carried his words into the hum of the city, calm, certain, unshakable. Across town, in a network office buzzing with nerves, Ethan Walker rehearsed his smile in the mirror again, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure it would save him. Morning light slanted across the New York skyline, cutting through, fog like a blade. In a downtown studio wrapped in glass and nerves, technicians were already wiring microphones and testing teleprompters for the exchange. Part 2. Every camera was booked, every seat claimed. Viewers in 48 states had already scheduled watch parties. Ethan Walker stared at his reflection in the dressing room mirror. The face that once symbolized control now looked haunted. His tie hung slightly crooked. The flawless charm that carried him for a decade trembled under the weight of tomorrow's headlines. Laura Bennett, headset perched around her neck, appeared at the door. "You've got 5 minutes," she said quietly. "And Ethan, don't improvise this time." He forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Since when did telling the truth count as improvisation? Since the truth started costing sponsors. She turned to leave, but hesitated. "Play it smart. If you try to embarrass him again, you'll make him a legend." Ethan's smile thinned. "He's not a legend." "Not yet," she said, and disappeared down the hall. Across the corridor, Derek Coleman adjusted his cufflinks. The same gray suit, the same calm. Tyrone Ellis stood beside him, scrolling through his phone. "Ratings forecast says 22 million people watching live," Tyrone said. That's more than the Super Bowl halftime pre-show. Derek chuckled softly. Then let's give them something worth remembering. Andre Gates arrived carrying a small leather binder. Final prep, he said, sliding it open to reveal charts and figures. Company inclusion stats, ad buy demographics, network diversity, reports. All public record. If they try you, use facts, not feelings. I don't do feelings on command, Derek said, closing the binder. I do truth. Tyrone exhaled. You really think they'll play fair? They don't have to, Derek replied. They just have to play. The truth handles the rest. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. Ethan Walker faced the camera, smile polished to a mirror finish. Good evening, America. Tonight, the exchange welcomes back Derek Coleman, founder of EcoFuse Technologies, whose recent appearance sparked a national conversation. He turned slightly, smile taut. Mr. Coleman, thank you for joining us again. Thanks for having me back, Derek said evenly. The audience applauded. Half of them supporters, half skeptics, all curious. Ethan continued, voice carefully, measured. Our previous discussion raised questions about media fairness, entrepreneurship, and race. I'd like tonight to be about solutions. That's good, Derek said, because solutions are what I build for a living. A few chuckles. Ethan forced a grin. Let's start simple. After last week's exchange, your company's website crashed from heavy traffic. Donations poured in. Some call you an opportunist using controversy for publicity. Derek clasped his hands on the desk. Opportunity isn't what you take, it's what you make. I didn't ask for the controversy, but I'll use it to power the next generation of black engineers. That's not opportunism. That's purpose. Applause. Again, louder this time. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pressed on. There are also claims that EcoFuse's community contracts give priority to minority-owned businesses. Isn't that exclusion by another name? Derek didn't blink. When the gate's been locked for decades, opening it halfway isn't inclusion. We're just holding it open the rest of the way. The crowd murmured approval. Ethan leaned, back searching for footing. So you admit race plays a role in your hiring practices? I admit merit was never colorblind to begin with, Derek said. We correct imbalance, we don't create it. Laura Bennett whispered through Ethan's earpiece. Ease up, he's winning the crowd. Ethan ignored her. You talk about imbalance, yet you live comfortably. Drive a luxury car, invest in tech. How does that square with the people you claim to represent? Derek's eyes held his. I grew up sharing a one-bedroom apartment with 4 cousins in Detroit. Comfort doesn't erase struggle, it proves progress. And progress doesn't mean forgetting where you came from, it means pulling others forward. The audience rose halfway, to its feet. Ethan's smile cracked. He tried humor. Well, Mr. Coleman, if this entrepreneurship thing ever dries up, politics might suit you. Politics requires permission, Derek replied. Purpose doesn't. Even the camera crew, suppressed grins. As the red light cut, Ethan slammed his cue cards onto the table. He's filibustering. Cut his mic if he dodges again. Todd Franklin's voice came through the control booth. Cutting his mic will make you the villain again. Let it roll. This is gold. Laura whispered sharply. Stick to the questions. He's baiting you and you're walking straight in. Ethan rubbed his temples. I'm not getting humiliated twice. Behind him, Derek sipped water calmly, as though the chaos around him were a different planet. Tyrone leaned in. You're rattling him, boss. Not the goal, Derek murmured. Truth rattles itself. I'm just the echo. Back from commercial. Ethan forced composure. Welcome back, Mr. Coleman. You've spoken about bias in coverage, but our data shows this network invests millions in diversity programs. Doesn't that contradict your claim? Derek leaned slightly forward. Not if those millions fund panels instead of people. Gasps. Ethan blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Derek said evenly, your network donated $2 million to diversity conferences last year and less than 10% went to actual black-owned media production. The rest went to PR events featuring you. Laughter and shock rippled through the crowd. Ethan flushed. Where are you getting that number? It's on your own tax filings, Derek replied. Public record, page 37, subsection B. You should read your own receipts. Camera 2 zoomed in on Ethan's face, tight, pale, cornered. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The control room phones lit up as producers texted, "Keep rolling." Derek continued, voice steady but rising in conviction. You invited me here to question credibility, but credibility doesn't come from who asks the questions. It comes from who answers them honestly. You wanted accountability on live TV, so here it is. He turned slightly toward the camera. For every entrepreneur watching tonight, remember this. You don't owe anyone your silence to be successful. You owe your truth to those who will come after you. Applause thundered. Standing ovation. Ethan stared at the floor as Derek's words reverberated across millions of screens. The moment the broadcast cut, staff swarmed. Laura Bennett clutched, her headset, shouting orders. Get transcripts to legal. Delete the raw feed until we review it. Greg Lawson, the network lawyer, burst through the side door. Too late. It's already clipped on social media. We're trending again. Ethan sank into his chair, silent. Derek removed his microphone, nodding politely to the stunned crew. Thank you for the opportunity, he said, voice composed. Todd Franklin called after him. Mr. Coleman off the record. That was the best television I've ever directed. Derek smiled faintly. Then let's hope it does more than entertain. A. walked out with Tyrone beside him. Outside, the crowd waiting on the sidewalk erupted in cheers as he stepped into the night air. Reporters thrust microphones forward. Mr. Coleman, do you think you've ended Ethan Walker's career? Derek shook his head. I'm not here to end careers. I'm here to start conversations. Within hours, the clip dominated every feed. Derek Coleman delivers masterclass. On live TV, Ethan Walker silenced by facts. Network under fire for diversity claims. Commentators debated whether the exchange marked a cultural turning point or just another viral moment. But for millions of viewers, teachers, entrepreneurs, factory workers, it felt personal. One viral tweet read, "He didn't raise his voice once. That's what real power sounds like." Meanwhile, Ethan's sponsors began calling. A beverage brand suspended its endorsement. A car company pulled advertising. Robert Hale summoned the crisis team at midnight. Contain it, he barked. Offer Ethan a week off. Say we're doing an internal review. Keep Derek Coleman off our network for now, he's radioactive. Too late, Laura said quietly. He's already scheduled on 4 other networks. They're calling him the new voice of integrity. Hale's shoulders sagged. Then we ride it out. But mark my words, America loves to lift someone up just to watch them fall. Find the angle. Back in Detroit, Clarence Boyd watched. The segment on his old television set. The flickering light filled his small living room as he smiled faintly. He reached for his phone and dialed. Son, he said when Derek answered. You just gave more kids hope than 1,000 scholarships ever could. Derek laughed softly. Then we'll build 1,001. Clarence's tone grew, serious. Be careful. When truth embarrasses power, power plots revenge. I know, Derek said. That's why we stay louder than their lies. 2 days later, an anonymous article appeared online accusing EcoFuse Technologies of financial mismanagement. The story cited unnamed sources and questionable spending. Tyrone stormed into Derek's office holding a tablet. They're trying to smear you. Derek scanned the headline calmly. I expected this. We should sue right now. Not yet, Derek said. Let them talk. While they chase shadows, we'll shine floodlights. He called Andre Gates. Pull our donation records and supplier audits, Derek ordered. Publish everything online. Full transparency. Let the truth stand naked before they can dress it up as scandal. By evening, EcoFuse's website featured every ledger and invoice publicly viewable. The article collapsed under scrutiny. Even rival journalists praised the move. CNN's headline the next day read, "Coleman outsmarts media machine with radical transparency." Church congregations quoted Derek's words in Sunday sermons. Universities invited him to speak on ethics in business. Meanwhile, conservative commentators called him dangerous. Derek refused to engage in hostility. "The truth doesn't shout," he told reporters. "It simply refuses to whisper." At home, stacks of letters arrived, daily handwritten notes from young entrepreneurs, single mothers, veterans. One read, "My son watched you and said, 'He looks like me, I can build something too.'" He kept that letter on his desk. Late, one night alone in his apartment, Derek stared out the window. Success had never felt so heavy. Tyrone's voice echoed from earlier, "You're becoming a movement." But movements had costs. He thought of Clarence's warning, of power plotting, revenge. Already whispers circulated that the network planned to sue for defamation. He sighed, closed his laptop, and whispered to the empty room, "If truth makes enemies, then silence makes accomplices." He chose enemies. Across town, Ethan sat in the darkened studio, replaying the broadcast again and again. Each line of Derek's dismantling carved deeper into his pride. Laura Bennett entered quietly. "You need rest, Ethan." He didn't look up. "He destroyed me." "No," she said softly. "You destroyed yourself by underestimating him." Ethan's eyes glistened. "What do I do now?" "Maybe start by listening," she said, and walked away. He stared after her, surrounded by silence thicker than applause. By Monday morning, the nation had split in two. Half the country hailed Derek, Coleman as a truth-teller. The other half called him a troublemaker, who'd humiliated a respected journalist. Cable networks ran split-screen debates with headlines that screamed, "Hero" or "Hustler." In Washington, D.C., congressional aides clipped those very segments into briefing packets. When movements shake public trust, Congress likes to pretend it started the conversation. That afternoon, Derek's assistant Tyrone Ellis entered his office, tablet in hand. "Boss, you might want to see this," he said. The tablet displayed an official letterhead, United States House Committee on Media Accountability. "They're inviting you to testify," Tyrone said, eyes wide. Derek leaned back in his chair. "Inviting or summoning?" "Technically inviting. Politically, they want a spectacle." Derek smiled faintly. "Then they'll get education instead." 2 weeks later, marble pillars loomed over flashing cameras as Derek walked into the committee room in a simple navy suit. Reporters shouted questions. He ignored them. Inside, lawmakers settled behind wooden desks like jurors in a national trial. The chairwoman, Representative Linda Hart, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Coleman, thank you for appearing. Your recent television remarks have raised serious questions about media integrity. We'd like to discuss constructive reforms." Derek nodded. "Reform only works if it includes the people who've been excluded." "Let's begin," Hart said. For 3 hours, Derek dissected how minority entrepreneurs were filtered out of mainstream coverage, how statistics were rewritten, sponsorships misallocated, and community stories buried. He never raised his voice, never accused. He simply laid out facts like blueprints. By the time he finished, half the committee looked stunned. Representative Hart leaned forward. "Mr. Coleman, would you consider advising our Media Fairness Initiative?" "I'll help," Derek said, "but not as decoration. If you want honesty, hire it." The gallery erupted in quiet applause before the gavel restored order. Outside the chamber, journalists surrounded him. "Mr. Coleman, are you declaring war on the press?" Derek smiled calmly. "No, I'm declaring partnership with truth as the referee." That quote led every evening broadcast. In Manhattan, Robert Hale slammed a folder onto his conference table. "Do you realize he's testifying on live TV while our host hides at home? We're bleeding credibility." Greg Lawson, the corporate lawyer, replied, We still have leverage. His company handles federal contracts. If we leak an ethics complaint, even a rumor, it'll stall his projects. Laura Bennett frowned. That's a smear campaign. Call it reputation management. Hale snapped. Find someone inside EcoFuse willing to talk. Laura hesitated. Sir, you're crossing lines. He glared. You think he didn't? He humiliated this network. Either help me fix it or find another job. Outside the boardroom, Laura lingered in the hallway, sickened. She'd watched Derek dismantle Ethan on air with grace, not cruelty. Now the same system that created bias wanted revenge for losing face. 2 days later, a blog headline appeared. Whistleblower claims EcoFuse misused federal funds. Anonymous, vague, perfectly timed. Within an hour, bigger outlets ran with it. Stock prices dipped. Sponsors froze payments. Tyrone burst into Derek's office. They did it again. Fake source, no documents. Derek read the article slowly. The lie's too thin to last, he said. Still, perception is currency, we'll show receipts. He called Andre Gates, his investor. Open the books again, then send them to every outlet that printed the rumor. No lawyers, just light. Andre hesitated. You sure that's total transparency? Truth doesn't need curtains, Derek said. Within hours, EcoFuse's verified data was public. Reporters scrambled to confirm. By nightfall, the rumor collapsed. Even skeptical analysts admitted the numbers were flawless. On social media, hashtags flipped, EcoFuse clears, its name. Truth over tactics, but behind closed doors, the network doubled down. Robert Hale snarled, Fine. If data won't bury him, emotion will. Bring Ethan Walker back. Ethan Walker had spent weeks hiding from headlines, his career dangling by a thread. When Hale's assistant called, he almost didn't answer. Ethan, we're reinstating you, Hale said bluntly. Special segment and exclusive documentary on the rise and controversy of Derek Coleman. Ethan froze. You want me to investigate him? I want balance, Hale replied. Expose inconsistencies, regain control, redemption sells. Ethan hesitated. Part of him burned to reclaim his reputation. Another part still heard Derek's calm voice slicing through arrogance. But he said yes. For weeks, Ethan's crew followed Derek's public events, community clean energy rallies, student workshops, church fundraisers. Everywhere Derek went, crowds greeted him with respect. Even critics admitted his work was real. Laura Bennett accompanied the crew, uneasy. You're looking for dirt that doesn't exist, she told Ethan quietly. I'm just doing my job, he replied. You're repeating your mistake, she said. Last time you underestimated him. This time you're underestimating truth. Ethan said nothing, but her words stayed lodged in his conscience. Then something unexpected happened. At a Detroit youth center, a teenage girl approached Derek during filming. My mom lost her job, she said softly. But I got accepted to your training program. I start Monday. Ethan watched from a distance as Derek smiled and congratulated her. No cameras, no performance, just genuine connection. Something in Ethan shifted. That night, reviewing footage, he told Laura, we can't twist this. The story's not about controversy. It's about character. Laura's eyes softened. Then maybe you're finally seeing what America already saw. Despite Ethan's subtle change of heart, Robert Hale ordered aggressive editing. Sound bites were spliced to imply Derek had political ambitions. Omissions turned compliments into arrogance. When the rise and controversy of Derek Coleman aired, public backlash was immediate. Viewers compared the footage to uncut clips posted online by bystanders. The manipulation was obvious. Within hours, the hashtag #EditGate trended. Ethan confronted Hale the next morning. You butchered my work. I tried to tell the truth. Hale's response was cold. We don't sell truth, we sell engagement. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then you can sell this chair because I'm done. He walked out, leaving his ID badge on the desk. When news of Ethan's resignation broke, Derek received a single-line email. I finally listened. EW. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then replied, "Then start talking where it matters." 2 days later, Ethan went public. He confirmed that executives had pressured him to distort coverage, and that Derek's transparency had been authentic all along. He released unedited footage as proof. The revelation exploded across the internet. Robert Hale was summoned before the network board. Advertisers pulled out. Stock prices fell faster than they'd ever risen. In less than a week, the media giant that tried to discredit one man found itself under federal investigation for ethics violations, the same committee Derek had advised. During the following press conference, reporters packed the hall. "Mr. Coleman, how does it feel to be vindicated?" someone asked. Derek smiled faintly. "Vindication isn't the goal. Correction is. The people who trusted us deserve clean power and a cleaner truth." "Do you forgive the network?" another shouted. "I forgive ignorance," Derek replied, "but I don't excuse it." The crowd erupted in applause. Later that evening, Derek met Ethan in a quiet park overlooking the Hudson. The city buzzed far below, but up here it was still. Ethan spoke first. "You didn't just outsmart me. You reminded me what journalism's supposed to be." Derek folded his hands. "Accountability's supposed to sting. That's how it heals." Ethan nodded. "They offered me a settlement to stay quiet. I refused. I'm starting an independent channel, no scripts, no edits. I'd like to feature real innovators, starting with you." Derek considered him for a moment. "Only if you promise one thing." "What's that?" "No applause track. Let the silence tell the truth." They both laughed, a rare human sound amid weeks of tension. Congress soon passed the Media Fairness Act, requiring networks receiving federal subsidies to disclose diversity metrics and editorial corrections publicly. Analysts credited Derek's testimony as the catalyst. In schools and universities, professors played clips from the exchange to teach rhetorical integrity. Students quoted his line, "Bias hides best when it's disguised as curiosity." In essays about ethics, EcoFuse expanded operations into 8 new states, employing thousands. Communities once ignored by mainstream investors now powered their own neighborhoods with renewable energy. And through it all, Derek refused political offers, repeating, "Change doesn't always need a title. Sometimes it just needs a mic." One night, long after the cameras moved on, Derek returned to Detroit. He visited the same workshop where EcoFuse began, a dusty space filled with tools, oil stains, and memories. Clarence Boyd waited there, older now but sharp as ever. "You turned a talk show insult into a national policy," Clarence said, smiling. "Proud of you, son," Derek chuckled. "I just answered questions honestly." Clarence's gaze softened. Honesty's the rarest currency left. They stood in silence, machines humming faintly around them. "Think they'll ever stop fighting you?" Clarence asked. "Probably not," Derek said. "But every lie they throw just feeds the light." Across America, the conversation kept echoing in classrooms, boardrooms, living rooms. Some argued he'd divided the nation. Others said he'd reminded it what conscience looked like. Late one evening, Derek looked out his office window at a skyline glowing with solar grids his company built. Tyrone entered quietly. "You know, people say you made history." Derek smiled. "History's just truth with good memory. Let's keep feeding it." Outside, the city pulsed with clean, energy-silent proof that conviction could power more than headlines. By summer, the storm had calmed, but the tides kept moving. Every network in America had rewritten its ethics code. Every PR department was combing through archives. Every newsroom whispering Derek Coleman's name like a litmus test for honesty. Yet Derek himself wanted no headlines. He wanted work. EcoFuse headquarters in Detroit. Morning light spilled across glass walls and humming servers. Technicians calibrated new solar converters. Interns darted through aisles of prototypes. The company had grown from 20 employees to 2,000 in 6 months, but success carried shadows. Tyrone Ellis entered with a folder thick as a novel. Requests, schools, mayors, think tanks, even Oprah's team. Everybody wants a piece of you. Derek didn't look up from his tablet. We'll give them programs, not pieces. Tell education outreach to prioritize public schools first. Tyrone grinned. You could charge 6 figures per speech. I'm not a product, Derek said. I'm a precedent. In Manhattan, the once mighty global news network faced its reckoning. Viewership had dropped 40%. Advertisers fled. Robert Hale was summoned before the board he once ruled. He stood at the end of a long mahogany table, sweating under fluorescent lights. Gentlemen, I accept responsibility, he began. A board member cut him off. You destroyed public trust and turned a talk show spat into a national scandal. Another added, Ethan Walker's confession finished us. Hale spread his hands. We can rebuild, rebrand. Americans forget fast. But the chairman shook his head. They don't forget integrity. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security escorted Hale from the building before noon. Laura Bennett watched from her office window, expression unreadable. She had resigned 2 weeks earlier, quietly joining Ethan's new independent media startup. They called it open source TV, no edits, no filters, live fact checks visible on screen. And their first guest would be Derek Coleman. The new studio was small, stripped of glitz brick walls, hanging bulbs, raw microphones. When Derek walked in, Ethan met him at the door with an outstretched hand. Welcome to transparency, he said. Derek clasped his hand firmly. Feels lighter without the makeup. They sat across from each other as cameras rolled. No studio audience, just millions watching online. Ethan opened simply. I once thought journalism was about control. You proved it's about courage. Tell me, how do you stay calm when the world's shouting? Derek smiled. Because shouting doesn't build. Listening does. And if I can't listen while they attack me, I'll never hear the people who believe in me. The hour-long conversation streamed uncut. Viewers flooded the chat with gratitude and disbelief. 2 former adversaries modeling grace on live TV. Clips of the handshake traveled faster than any argument. Days later, Derek launched the Coleman Initiative for Future Builders, a non-profit devoted to teaching underfunded schools how to build solar microgrids from recycled parts. Students learned not just circuits but self-reliance. At the ribbon cutting in Chicago, a 7th grader asked, Mr. Coleman, are you famous or something? He laughed. No, kid. I'm just busy. Local news called it the quietest revolution in modern education. Ethan covered the story through open source TV, his narration stripped of ego. Sometimes redemption isn't a headline it's showing, up where the cameras used to point away. But fame attracts gravity. Soon political strategists began circling like satellites seeking orbit. One morning, Tyrone burst into Derek's office. You just got invited to a campaign summit in D.C., both parties. They want you to endorse somebody. Derek looked up slowly. Endorse or become? Both, maybe. Rumor is donors see you as presidential material. He chuckled. That's how they bury change under paperwork and applause. Tell them no. Straight no? Tyrone asked. Tell them I already have a job. I power homes, not headlines. Still, speculation spread. Pollsters ran imaginary matchups. Coleman versus career politician. Cable pundits debated whether America was ready for a leader who didn't want to lead. Derek ignored them. He had classrooms to visit, turbines to inspect, neighborhoods to electrify. Not everyone wanted his silence to win. A private PR firm, hired by disgraced executives loyal to Hale, released a new rumor that Derek's innovations were foreign-funded. It started small anonymous posts on fringe blogs, then trickled into mainstream discourse. By the time major networks asked for comment, online trolls had spun conspiracy threads hundreds of pages long. Tyrone slammed his laptop shut. Boss, this never ends. Derek sighed. Lies are energy too, they just burn dirty. He called a press conference the next morning not to defend himself but to demonstrate. In front of dozens of reporters, he connected a portable solar array to a streetlight and powered the microphones directly from the system. This is the source, he said, gesturing to the panels. If truth had voltage, maybe we'd waste less of it talking. The clip went viral again, another calm dismantling of chaos. Commentators admitted defeat. You can't scandalize a man who answers rumor with results. Despite his composure, exhaustion crept in. He slept less, traveled more. Fame, even righteous fame, eroded privacy. One night in a Houston hotel, Derek stared at a wall of unanswered messages. Awards, invitations, documentaries. He called Clarence Boyd. "Old man," Derek said softly. "I'm tired." Clarence chuckled on the other end. "Good, means you're building something worth guarding." "I feel like I'm teaching the same lesson to people who already heard it." "Then teach it louder," Clarence said. "Truth's an echo, it fades if you stop talking." Derek smiled faintly. "You always know how to turn fatigue into fuel." "That's experience," Clarence replied, "and faith." Weeks later, tragedy struck. A summer storm damaged one of EcoFuse's community grids in rural Mississippi. Media cameras swarmed, hungry for failure. Within hours, competitors accused Derek of cutting corners. Pundits declared the Coleman myth over, but Derek flew in overnight with a small team, wading through floodwater to inspect every panel. He found that the failure wasn't in design, it was in maintenance, neglected by local officials after funding cuts. Still, he took responsibility publicly. "Leadership means owning more than your share of the blame," he told reporters. Because accountability teaches faster than excuses. He stayed until every light flickered back on. By dawn, residents lined the streets applauding him with flashlights held high. Social media renamed the town Coleman County for a day. Meanwhile, Ethan Walker filmed a full-length documentary titled "The System and the Silence." It traced how one entrepreneur exposed the machinery of bias and turned it into blueprints for progress. When the documentary premiered at Sundance, critics expected preaching. Instead, they found humility. In one pivotal scene, Ethan narrates over footage of Derek repairing the flooded grid. He never shouted, never demanded credit. He just kept fixing what others broke, proof that character isn't built in comfort, but in cleanup. The film received a standing ovation. Ethan walked onto the stage and said quietly, "This isn't my redemption story. It's America's reminder." Backstage, Derek hugged him. "You finally learned to listen," he said. "And you finally let me," Ethan replied. For the first time in months, Derek took a weekend off. He drove alone through Michigan's back roads, stopping at a small diner he used to visit during EcoFuse's early days. The waitress recognized him immediately. "Aren't you that TV guy?" He smiled. "Sometimes." She poured his coffee and said, "My boy's in your program. Built a solar charger for his school. Says you changed his life." Derek looked out the window, blinking away quiet emotion. "He changed his own. I just handed him a wrench." When he left, she slipped the bill into his hand blank. He turned it over. Someone had written, "Thank you for showing what dignity looks like." He drove home in silence, heart heavier and lighter all at once. Months later, a bipartisan coalition announced a new initiative, the Future Leaders Council, and named Derek as honorary chair without asking him first. Cameras caught his reaction live at an education summit. "I appreciate the gesture," he said, smiling, "but America doesn't need more councils. It needs consistency. Let's finish the projects we already promised before inventing new titles." Applause erupted. Headlines read, "Coleman declines power again." Some pundits called it arrogance. Others called it the first honest act in modern politics. Either way, Derek's refusal only increased public respect. Winter returned. Snow blanketed Detroit's solar rooftops, reflecting soft light into Derek's home office. He finally turned off his phone, brewed coffee, and sat by the window watching quiet streets hum with energy his company had created. Tyrone knocked gently. "Boss, everything okay?" "For once," Derek said, smiling. "Everything's working and no one's yelling." "You sure you're not going to miss the chaos?" Tyrone teased. Derek laughed. "Chaos made me visible. Peace keeps me useful." He looked out again at the faint dawn. "For a long time they told us we couldn't change the system from the inside," he said softly. "Turns out you just have to walk in with enough light to short it out." Tyrone nodded. And now? Now, Derek said, we teach others how to hold the flashlight. That evening, Ethan's new network streamed a montage marking 1 year since the exchange showdown. Clips showed Derek shaking hands with students, standing under rebuilt grids, smiling beside engineers of every background. Ethan's closing narration played softly over the footage. He didn't dismantle a host. He rewired a conversation. And when the noise faded, America heard itself again. The screen faded to black. And somewhere, in a quiet Detroit office bathed in reflected snowlight, Derek Coleman closed his eyes not in retreat, but in rest. Spring came early that year. Detroit's skyline glittered under sunlight reflected from hundreds of EcoFuse panels, a living map of what resilience could build. But while America healed its conscience, the world had started to notice. International investors called. European cities requested partnerships. And halfway across the globe, a major conglomerate from Singapore, Solaris Dynamics, offered Derek a deal worth $500 million to license EcoFuse's designs worldwide. It wasn't temptation that made him hesitate. It was instinct. At his downtown office, Andre Gates laid out the proposal. They want 51% control in exchange for full-scale distribution, global exposure, instant capital, everything we dreamed of. Derek studied the documents, in silence. And when they own the majority, who ensures they don't price out the people we built this for? Andre sighed. You can't save everyone, D. Global scale means compromise. Derek leaned back. Then let's grow slower. I'd rather light 1,000 homes than lose one principal. Andre looked at him for a long moment. You're a rare breed, man. World's gonna call that arrogance. Derek smiled faintly. They always do right before they copy it. That evening, Derek sat alone in his office when his assistant Tyrone Ellis entered quietly, holding an envelope. This came for you. No return address. Inside was a short letter written in careful script. If you ever want to know why your father left, call this number. CB. For a moment, the air felt heavier. Clarence Boyd, the man who'd mentored him, taught him strategy, and guarded him like a son, had also been keeping a secret? He called immediately. Clarence answered on the second ring, voice calm as ever. I knew you'd call. What is this about my father? Derek asked. Time you met him, Clarence said softly. He's alive. A week later, Derek drove to a small town outside Baton Rouge, where cypress trees leaned over quiet roads and the air smelled of rain and earth. Clarence waited outside an old farmhouse. Inside sat an elderly man with eyes that mirrored Derek's. Dad? Derek asked quietly. The man nodded slowly. Been a long road, son. For a moment, words failed them both. His father, Samuel Coleman, had left when Derek was 8. The family believed he'd died in an accident, but the truth was messier. He'd been a whistleblower at a chemical company that covered up pollution, deaths. Threats drove him underground. Clarence had helped hide him for decades. Samuel's voice trembled. I watched you on TV, son. You turned the fight I ran from into something real. Derek swallowed hard. You didn't run. You survived. And you gave me the map without saying a word. They talked for hours about silence, fear, and the cost of integrity. When Derek left, Samuel clasped his hand. They'll come for you harder now, son. They always do when truth starts paying dividends. Derek nodded. Then I'll keep the lights on for you this time. 2 months later, a new company appeared, seemingly overnight. Nova Green Technologies, led by a young CEO named Graham Vance. He'd been a mid-level engineer once fired from EcoFuse for falsifying reports. Now backed by old network investors, he unveiled revolutionary energy grids suspiciously similar to Derek's. Tyrone stormed into the conference room. They're ripping you off line for line. Andre flipped through schematics. This is your blueprint, demodified just enough to dodge patents. Derek exhaled slowly. Then they're not copying the system, they're copying the soul. And that, they can't fake. Still, Nova Green's stock soared. Media hailed Vance as the next Coleman, a phrase that stung more for its carelessness. Than competition, Clarence called that night. "You gonna fight it?" "Not yet," Derek said. "Truth's a marathon, not a lawsuit." But Nova Green wasn't playing fair. Behind the scenes, Vance hired a PR firm to spread rumors that Derek had stolen his own designs, a twisted reversal of reality. Reporters began circling again, hungry for a second scandal. Tyrone burst in one morning. "They've filed a formal complaint with the patent office. They're trying to freeze your production." Derek rubbed his temples. "They want chaos. We'll give them clarity." He called a press conference at EcoFuse headquarters. Instead of lawyers, he stood alone before cameras holding a stack of blueprints. "These designs aren't just mine," he said. "They're public now, open source. Anyone who wants to build cleaner energy, build it. My patents belong to the people." The crowd gasped. Tyrone whispered from the wings, "You just gave away billions." Derek smiled. "Can't steal what's already shared." Within hours, Nova Green's strategy collapsed. By freeing his blueprints, Derek turned their attack into exposure. Thousands of community engineers downloaded the plans overnight. From Lagos to Lima, small villages began using EcoFuse's open-source designs to power schools and hospitals. The movement gained a new name online: the Light Project. Students posted videos assembling panels from recycled scrap, tagging Derek with thanks. Ethan Walker covered it on his network, his voice proud. When the system tried to silence him, he turned noise into power. And now the world runs on. His refusal to be selfish. International organizations nominated Derek for humanitarian awards. He declined them all. "I didn't invent generosity," he said simply. "I just remembered it was renewable." But even as Derek's movement spread, Ethan faced pressure of his own. The government's new Media Fairness Commission, inspired by Derek's testimony, had appointed him as an advisor. Soon lobbyists began knocking, offering funding for balanced oversight. Laura Bennett warned him, "They'll use your credibility to water down reform." Ethan looked torn. "If I refuse, someone worse takes my seat. If I accept, they think I'm compromised." "Then accept," Laura said. "But fight like Derek does, quietly with facts." Ethan smiled grimly. "Then I'll need a better flashlight." Meanwhile, not everyone cheered Derek's open-source victory. Investors who lost millions through Nova Green's collapse began threatening lawsuits. Anonymous messages arrived in his inbox. "You'll regret this generosity." Security advised armed protection. Derek refused. "I won't guard truth with guns," he told Tyrone. "That's not security. That's surrender." Instead, he doubled down on outreach, traveling to smaller towns, mentoring local inventors, reminding them their ideas had value. During one trip to Alabama, an older woman approached him after a town hall. "My husband worked for the same plant your daddy exposed," she whispered. "He died before anyone listened. You make them listen now." Derek's eyes softened. Then this fight was never mine alone. One night, after yet another televised panel, Derek returned home to find his door ajar. Inside, papers lay scattered: no theft, no vandalism, just intrusion. A warning. He called Clarence, who sighed heavily. "They're scared. When truth scares men with money, they start acting like men without souls." "Then we're close," Derek replied quietly. The next day, he announced a new foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers in technology and media, the Coleman Integrity Trust. It offered legal aid, security, and funding for truth-tellers silenced by corporations. Donations poured in faster than expected. Reporters asked why he'd risk further backlash. He answered simply, "Because silence is expensive, and most people can't afford it." Months later, Samuel Coleman moved north to live near Derek. He spent afternoons visiting EcoFuse workshops, sitting beside young engineers who called him Mr. C. One evening, as they walked through a newly opened research facility, Samuel turned to his son. "You know, when I hid all those years, I thought silence protected me. But watching you, I realize it only postponed the truth." Derek smiled. "You gave me the map. I just stopped hiding." His father chuckled. "And now the whole world sees our family name under light bulbs. Never thought redemption could glow like this. By year's end, Congress held hearings reviewing the success of the Media Fairness Act. Ethan presented data showing increased minority representation across all networks. At the end of his report, he quoted Derek. "Bias hides best when it's disguised as curiosity." The committee room fell silent. For the first time in decades, legislators applauded a journalist. Outside, reporters asked Ethan what the quote meant to him now. He smiled softly. "It means I finally learned to stop mistaking curiosity for control." One quiet night, Derek sat in his office surrounded by blueprints not for new machines but for new minds, curriculums, workshops, and apprenticeship networks. Tyrone entered carrying coffee. "Boss, you ever think about how far this went? You were supposed to be a guest on a talk show. Now half the planet quotes you." Derek chuckled. "All because a man asked a bad question on live TV, and you answered it better than anyone expected," Tyrone added. He looked out at the city lights flickering across the horizon. "Maybe that's all leadership is, answering the questions no one's ready to hear." That week, Ethan aired one final interview with Derek before retiring from television. His closing line captured the nation again. "Some men build companies, some build legacies, but once in a lifetime, someone builds truth and then gives it away." The camera lingered on Derek's calm smile as the credits rolled. No dramatic music, no applause, just quiet awe. And outside the studio, under a skyline glowing with the power of his vision, America kept the lights on. The world had never seen an engineer become a symbol. By spring of the following year, EcoFuse panels gleamed from rooftops in Nairobi, Seoul, and Sao Paulo. Reporters called it the quiet globalization of conscience. But with every country that adopted his model came governments that wanted to own it. Derek Coleman didn't want to be owned. He was in Geneva when it began, a global energy summit packed with presidents, CEOs, and lobbyists who treated climate policy like a stock ticker. As Derek walked toward the podium, he noticed the front row. Flags, cameras, and one face he hadn't expected: Graham Vance, the disgraced rival behind Nova Green. Vance smiled like a man who'd been forgiven by time. Next to him sat a Chinese industrial magnate, a Saudi oil executive, and a European Union minister, all whispering about licensing Derek's technology for international security purposes. Derek adjusted the mic. "I didn't come here to privatize sunlight," he began. The room went still. "I came here to remind us that energy, like truth, was never supposed to have a price tag." Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. A few clapped. The rest took notes, already drafting ways to spin his words into policy that profited them. After the speech, aides swarmed him with offers. A South Asian consortium proposed a 10-year partnership. A European bank offered unlimited loans in exchange for favorable trade patents. Derek's answer was the same each time. "If it doesn't serve the people who can't afford power, it doesn't serve me." Behind him, Andre Gates muttered, "You realize we just turned down $1 billion offer?" Derek smiled. "We just turned down a leash." Later that night, in his Geneva hotel room, he received an encrypted email. "Meet me tomorrow. Urgent EW." They met in a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Lehman. Ethan Walker looked different, hair longer, sleeves rolled up, carrying a notebook instead of cue cards. "I'm embedded with the UN Transparency Council now," he said. "They want me to document global corruption and climate deals, and I need your help." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Journalists used to chase scandals. Now they want to prevent them?" Ethan grinned. "You ruined the old model." He slid over a folder. Inside were leaked memos showing governments planning to license EcoFuse tech for weapons power grids, turning clean energy into military advantage. "If this leaks publicly, you'll be accused of starting an international crisis," Ethan warned. "If it doesn't," Derek said, "innocent people will pay for another generation." They agreed to work together quietly. 3 weeks later, Open Source TV published a documentary titled Power Plays. It revealed how several superpowers tried to weaponize Derek's open-source grids for drone energy systems. The footage, backed by Ethan's verified documents, sent shockwaves through global politics. Some called Derek a hero again. Others called him a traitor. The United Nations summoned an emergency council. When asked if he had authorized the leak, Derek answered, "I authorized transparency. Everything else authorized itself." Within 48 hours, major contracts collapsed. Markets panicked. But in small villages across Africa and South America, people cheered. For once, someone had told the truth before the fallout. The next morning, the American State Department distanced itself from Derek. Commentators labeled him unmanageable, idealistic, a danger to economic stability. Andre paced his office. "They're threatening sanctions against our foreign branches. We could lose millions." Derek poured himself coffee. "Then we'll lose money, not morality." Tyrone frowned. "You can't keep fighting everyone, D. They'll break you." Derek looked out the window. They can't break what doesn't bend. But privately, fatigue gnawed at him. He'd been living in airports, sleeping on flights, answering crises like a firefighter of ethics. And beneath the resolve, loneliness grew louder. One night in Berlin, Derek opened his inbox to find a message from Samuel Coleman, his father. "Son, the truth has its own metabolism. It eats what feeds it, and sometimes that's you. Come home." He stared at the words for a long time. Then he booked the next flight to Detroit. Back home, the city had changed. EcoFuse headquarters now covered 4 city blocks, powered entirely by its own systems. Billboards showed smiling students installing panels, the Coleman Initiative, power belongs to the people. But inside, Derek felt strangely out of place. He'd spent so long defending ideals that he'd forgotten how to live without an enemy. Samuel greeted him at the door. "You look tired." "Just thinking too much," Derek said. His father handed him an old photo Derek at 12, fixing a radio. "You didn't build that to be famous," Samuel said. "You built it because you liked the sound coming back after the silence. Don't lose that." While Derek rested, Nova Green resurfaced under new management, a consortium of former government contractors who renamed it HelioCore. Their PR slogan, "Innovation without politics." Behind the branding was the same motive: reclaim control of public energy. They offered free installations in struggling countries funded secretly by fossil fuel lobbyists, aiming to rebrand themselves as green allies. Ethan investigated and found proof. HelioCore's funding traced back to the same executives who once silenced whistleblowers, including men implicated in Samuel Coleman's old chemical plant scandal. When Derek saw the files, he whispered, "Full circle." Ethan nodded. "If we don't stop them, they'll repaint the system you bled to fix." At a global press summit in New York, HelioCore announced its World Partnership Initiative. Executives beamed as they promised clean energy with corporate efficiency. Then Derek stepped onto the stage uninvited. Security froze, unsure whether to intervene. He faced the cameras calmly. "Efficiency without ethics is just exploitation in a tuxedo," he said. "HelioCore doesn't want to power the world, they want to own its switch." Gasps filled the hall. HelioCore's CEO tried to interrupt, but Derek raised his voice for the first time. "My father risked his life exposing men like you decades ago. You buried truth under contracts. I'm here to tell you the earth remembers." The hall erupted. News feeds exploded. Within hours, HelioCore's stock collapsed under public pressure and federal scrutiny. When the noise faded, Derek returned to Detroit. Reporters camped outside his home asking if he planned to run for office, if he'd start a global movement, if he'd become the conscience of capitalism. He answered each question with one line: "I already have a job keeping." The light's honest. That night he sat with Samuel on the porch, city lights flickering like constellations. "You could be anything now," Samuel said quietly. "I just want to be consistent," Derek replied. Months later, the UN adopted the Coleman Accord, a global framework ensuring open-source sustainability projects remain free from corporate monopolies. For the first time, developing nations gained equal access to clean energy data. During the signing ceremony, Derek stood in the back, not at the podium. When journalists asked why, he smiled. "Spotlights for reflection, works for motion. Ethan's Commentary aired worldwide. In a world obsessed with ownership, Derek Coleman taught us the simplest equation: share enough light, and no one can steal the sun. Amid celebrations, Derek received unexpected news. One of his earliest students, a young engineer named Lena Harris, had died in a car accident on her way to present a new solar battery design. She'd been 23. At her funeral, Derek spoke briefly. Lena built for a future she would never see. That's what faith looks like. Afterward, he sat alone in his car, eyes closed. For the first time, he cried. Tyrone found him there, silent. "You okay, boss?" "She was just starting," Derek whispered, and the world already took her silence. Tyrone placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we make sure her design doesn't die too." And they did. EcoFuse named their new scholarship after her, the Lena Harris Fellowship for Young Inventors. Months later, a handwritten note arrived at Derek's desk. "I've accepted a government post overseeing independent media funding. I used to think exposure was the goal. Now I know protection is. Thank you for teaching me the difference." Signed simply, E.W. Derek smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it beside his father's old photo. Different generations. Same fight. That evening, he visited a local community center where students built solar radios just like the one from his childhood photo. One kid, barely 10, handed him a working prototype. "Mr. Coleman, it only cost $5 to make." Derek turned the knob, and static gave way to music. He smiled. $5 for truth that travels? Sounds like a bargain." The kids laughed. Outside, the sun dipped behind rooftops, but the lights stayed on, powered by panels they'd built themselves. Later that night, Derek sat on his porch again, the city glowing softly beyond. Samuel joined him, wrapped in a blanket. "You changed the world," his father said. Derek shook his head. "No, I just reminded it how to listen." The wind carried faint music from the kids' radios down the block. For once, there was no argument, no headline, no war for narrative, just the hum of harmony powered by honesty. By the time the second year of EcoFuse's global expansion began, success had become its own kind of storm. Derek Coleman no longer had to chase attention. Attention chased him. His ideas powered cities. His name filled textbooks. His interviews replayed in classrooms from Detroit to Dakar. But with every layer of influence came a new kind of pressure, this time not from enemies outside, but from cracks forming within his own creation. He had built EcoFuse on transparency, yet the bigger it grew, the more invisible corners it developed. One morning, Tyrone Ellis entered his office looking troubled. "Boss, accounting found discrepancies in one of the regional branches. Overseas contracts numbers don't add up." Derek looked up from his laptop. "Which branch?" "Kenya." "But it's not just there. Looks like someone's been rerouting community grants through a shell supplier." For a moment, Derek said nothing. He stared at the reports, recognizing a familiar pattern, the same quiet greed that once lived in boardrooms now creeping into the very movement meant to destroy it. "Who signed off?" "Name says Lewis Coleman." Derek froze. The name hit like a slap. His younger brother. He hadn't spoken to Lewis in nearly 15 years. The last time they'd been in the same room was at their mother's funeral, when an argument about money turned into silence that lasted a decade. Now that name appeared on fraudulent invoices under his company's letterhead. "Get me a flight to Nairobi," Derek said quietly. Andre tried to reason with him. "We can handle this internally, send legal, send auditors." "No," Derek said. "If I built a movement on accountability, I face it myself." The flight felt longer than usual. Each cloud outside the window carried memories, childhood fights, college choices, and the moment Lewis dropped out of school saying he didn't want to live in his brother's shadow. Now that shadow stretched across continents. When Derek arrived, the local EcoFuse office buzzed with nervous energy. Employees stood straighter, whispered softer. Lewis waited in a glass-walled conference room, older, heavier, dressed in a tailored suit that didn't quite fit his conscience. "Didn't expect to see you," Lewis said flatly. I didn't expect to, Derek replied, until I saw your name on stolen funds. Lewis laughed bitterly. Stolen? You think I pocketed it? I used it to grease officials so your projects wouldn't get buried in bureaucracy. The world doesn't run on sermons, brother. It runs on shortcuts. You call corruption efficiency? Derek asked quietly. I call it reality, Lewis snapped. You sit in offices preaching integrity, while people out here can't get panels cleared through customs without paying someone off. I kept your dream alive, Derek. You should be thanking me. Derek's voice softened. You kept it alive by killing its soul. Lewis looked away, jaw tight. You always had the luxury of purity because you had me doing the dirty work. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the faint hum of solar inverters outside filled the silence. I'll fix this, Derek said finally. But you're done here. Lewis's eyes hardened. You think firing me saves you? Wait until the press finds out your own brother's a thief. They'll tear you apart. Derek stood slowly. Then let them. The truth's worth the scars. By morning, the audit results went public. Derek himself announced them in a press release that shocked investors and inspired everyone else. No system is immune to failure, he wrote. But failure only becomes corruption when you hide it. Some analysts called it reckless. Others called it revolutionary. For the first time, a global CEO had exposed his own company's flaw before anyone else could. Still, the personal toll cut deep. That night, Derek sat alone on his hotel balcony, staring at the dim lights of Nairobi's skyline. Tyrone joined him quietly. You did the right thing, he said. Right doesn't mean painless, Derek murmured. He's still my brother. Tyrone nodded. And maybe one day he'll remember who taught him better. Back in the States, the media pounced. Talk shows framed the story as the fall of the Coleman Empire. Cable networks debated whether Derek's honesty was heroism or weakness. Ethan Walker called from New York. They're twisting it again. Want me to go on air and clear the record? Derek hesitated. No, let them talk. Noise burns itself out faster than silence, but not all noise was hostile. Across social media, young activists praised him for showing that integrity wasn't perfection, it was correction. Teachers used his press release as a case study in ethics. Even world leaders quietly cited his transparency as the model for anti-corruption policy. Still, something inside him remained unsettled. Weeks later, a letter arrived at EcoFuse headquarters bearing a foreign postage mark. Inside was a handwritten note. I was wrong. You built something I didn't understand. I'm turning myself in to authorities here. Tell Dad I'm sorry. Louis Derek read it twice, then folded it gently. Samuel found him later sitting in the company's atrium beneath the giant world map of solar installations. You can't protect everyone, son, the old man said. I wasn't trying to, Derek replied, just trying to protect the idea that we still can. Samuel smiled faintly. That's what I see when I look at you, faith disguised as engineering. Months passed. The scandal faded. EcoFuse stabilized. But Derek knew the organization had grown too large for one conscience to manage. He restructured it into autonomous, local co-ops, each run by community leaders rather than distant executives. Power, literally and figuratively, returned to the people. Reporters asked if he feared losing control. Control was never the goal, he told them. It's the disease. Under the new model, profits shrank but impact multiplied. Rural, towns that had once waited years for aid now powered themselves within months. Derek visited one such town in Georgia where kids had built a mini-grid from scrap wire and reclaimed panels. A girl handed him a hand-drawn poster. Thank you for showing grown-ups how to be honest, he smiled. They're still learning. One evening, Ethan Walker visited Detroit for the first time in months. His hair had gone slightly gray. His voice carried more calm than ambition. Congress is voting on the Global Ethics Treaty next week, he said. They want you to attend the signing ceremony. I'm not a politician, Derek replied. You're the reason it exists, Ethan said. They're calling it the Coleman Clause, requiring every international contract to include a public transparency provision. Derek looked down, shaking his head. I never wanted my name in laws, just in lessons. Ethan smiled. Sometimes, they're the same thing. The night before the vote, Derek couldn't sleep. He walked through the silent EcoFuse labs, past humming generators and blinking indicator lights. Each one reminded him of faces: the interns, the workers, the villages that trusted him. He realized leadership wasn't about being followed. It was about walking far enough ahead to clear the path, then stepping aside so others could continue. At dawn, he wrote a message on the company's internal network. If EcoFuse ever becomes about one man, shut it down. Truth belongs to everyone, or to no one. When he arrived at the signing ceremony, the crowd erupted. Presidents shook his hand, cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions. But when asked to speak, he simply said, "The future isn't an invention, it's a decision. Let's keep deciding right." That night, back in Detroit, he visited his father's house. Samuel was on the porch, radio humming softly. "They passed it," Derek said. Samuel smiled. "World's a little cleaner tonight." Derek sat beside him, staring at the stars. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't blown the whistle back then?" His father nodded slowly. "Every day, but regret's just memory without purpose. You gave mine one again." For a long time, they sat in silence. The wind rustled the trees, carrying faint laughter from a nearby block party powered by EcoFuse. "Lights." Samuel turned to him. "You gonna rest now?" Derek chuckled. "Maybe for an hour." "Good," his father said. "Then teach again." Weeks later, during a small public lecture at Howard University, Derek addressed a room full of engineering students. "You'll be told that ethics slows progress," he said. "But progress without ethics isn't progress, it's pollution with better branding. Every line of code, every circuit, every design you make is a vote for the kind of world you want. Cast it wisely." Afterward, one student approached him. "Mr. Coleman, I want to do what you do someday." He smiled gently. "Then start by doing it better." The student grinned. "That sounds impossible." "Good," Derek said. "That's how change begins." Later that evening, he found himself walking alone through downtown Detroit, where street murals now bore his quotes alongside images of solar panels and city skylines. He paused before one painted under a bridge. "Power is not privilege, it's proof you can share." Someone had scrawled beneath it, DC. He laughed softly. "Never thought my initials would end up as graffiti for good." Tyrone called from across the street. "Boss, reporters want to know what's next for you." Derek thought for a long moment before answering. "Next? I teach them to need me less." That night, back home, he opened his old laptop and reread an email chain with Lewis from years ago. At the very end, one line stood out. "One day, they'll realize we were just trying to fix what broke us," Derek whispered. "We did, little brother, we did." He closed the screen and sat quietly, the faint hum of solar power filling the silence. Outside, the city glowed steady and warm, a skyline stitched together by the work of millions who'd chosen light over noise. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of endurance, the kind that comes after you've said everything that needed saying and the world finally starts to understand. And as dawn crept over Detroit, Derek Coleman looked out his window, the horizon bright with energy he no longer had to defend, whispering to himself, "Let there be light this time, honest." The months after the Coleman Clause passed felt different. The constant rush of reporters, the calls from investors, the debates in Congress all faded into a quieter rhythm. Detroit thrummed with energy, not noise. Across the city, children walked home beneath streetlights powered by EcoFuse grids, their reflections glimmering off windows that once hid darkness. Derek Coleman no longer needed to explain what he'd built. The light spoke louder than any press release. Yet peace never arrived without irony. The same fame that freed him now chained his time. Every morning brought another invitation. World, summits, honorary degrees, corporate boards begging for his approval. Tyrone filtered hundreds of requests daily, but one message caught his attention. It came from a high school principal in Baltimore. asking if Derek could visit for career day. They've been running on your panel since last winter, Tyrone said, waving the letter. They just want you to see what it means to them. Derek smiled. Book it. I'm overdue for a classroom. The trip was unannounced, no media, no entourage, just Derek and Tyrone driving through quiet neighborhoods where solar shingles glimmered like scales under the sun. At the school, students erupted when he stepped through the doors. They had painted a mural of him holding a wrench and a light bulb, surrounded by the words, "Build the change you complain about." One girl shyly handed him a binder full of design sketches. "We built this using your open plans," she said. "Our city council wants to install it downtown." Derek flipped through the pages, stunned by their precision. "You're 13, he said. She grinned. "And inspired?" He chuckled. "Then keep breaking my records." That afternoon, he walked outside, hands in his pockets, thinking how strange it felt to see legacy breathing in front of him, instead of carved on plaques. He realized movements didn't belong to leaders. They belonged to the people who refused to let them die. But peace, once again, proved temporary. 2 weeks later, Andre Gates entered Derek's office with an expression he hadn't worn since the network scandal years earlier. "We've got a problem," he said. "Big one." Derek looked up. "Corporate or human?" "Both." The new EcoFuse board members in Europe approved a joint venture with an arms manufacturing group without telling us. They're using our battery tech to power surveillance drones. For a long moment, silence thickened between them. "How bad is it?" Derek asked finally. Andre slid a folder across the desk. "Bad enough that if the media finds out, it'll undo everything we built." Derek opened the file, scanning signatures, some forged, some real, all beneath the company's logo. "We promised the world our technology wouldn't feed weapons," he said quietly, "and now it's powering them." Tyrone spoke up from the corner. "Do we go public or fix it quietly?" Derek closed the folder. "There's no such thing as quiet when people's lives are at stake." That night he drafted a statement exposing the unauthorized deal and demanding an international audit. The board begged him to reconsider, warning of lawsuits and bankruptcy. He released it anyway. By dawn, EcoFuse stock had dropped 30%, but public trust soared. Commentators called it the most self-destructive act of honesty in corporate history. Derek called it maintenance. Still, the fallout was brutal. Investors fled. Politicians who once quoted him distanced themselves. The same news anchors who'd praised his courage now questioned his leadership. Ethan called from Washington, voice heavy. "You knew they'd turn on you." "I counted on it," Derek replied. "Every system tests its own sincerity eventually." "Then what now?" Ethan asked. "Rebuild," Derek said simply, "and start where no one's looking." He spent the next month traveling through forgotten towns across America, communities where factories had closed and hope came secondhand. He spoke in union halls, diners, and church basements. He listened more than he talked. People didn't care about clean energy. They cared about being seen. So he launched a new program called Project Groundwire, training unemployed workers to install microgrids in their own neighborhoods. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't televised. But it worked. When the first Groundwire town powered up, reporters called it a small miracle. Derek called it justice at work speed. Andre watched from the sidelines, shaking his head. "You really don't care about profit, do you?" "I care about permanence," Derek said. "Profit fades when the power goes out." Meanwhile, his brother Louis wrote from prison. The letter was raw but sincere. "I watch the news sometimes. They still say your honesty costs too much. I think they're wrong. It costs exactly what it should." Derek read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it next to his father's whistleblower medal. The family legacy had come full circle. One generation exposing poison, the next purifying light. Months later, an unexpected visitor appeared at EcoFuse headquarters, a senator from Texas named Rebecca Lane. She had built her career as a skeptic of environmental programs but now faced a crisis, rolling blackouts across her state. "We need your expertise," she said bluntly, "but we can't afford your lectures." Derek smiled. You can't afford not to hear them. She frowned. Is that a yes or no? It's a partnership, he said, but only if we build it transparent. She hesitated, then extended her hand. Deal. The partnership transformed Texas's grid within a year, proving even ideological enemies could find common current. When the first district lit up without fossil fuel support, the senator stood beside him at the ceremony and whispered, You're annoying, Coleman, but you're right. He grinned. That's the nicest thing a politician's ever said to me. Despite success, tension brewed inside EcoFuse again. Some executives demanded that Derek delegate or step aside. You're too idealistic, one board member argued. Our competitors move faster because they cut corners. Derek leaned forward across the conference table. Corners hold the structure together. Cut enough of them and the roof falls in. He stood and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind him. Tyrone followed, muttering, You know they'll vote to remove you one day. Derek shrugged. Maybe they should. The goal was never to stay in charge, it was to prove integrity could survive leadership. Weeks later it happened. The board voted to reorganize, shifting him into an honorary founder role. Reporters called it exile. Derek called it graduation. He held a brief press conference, smiling faintly as microphones crowded around him. EcoFuse doesn't need my name anymore, he said. It has its own. That's how you know you've succeeded. A journalist asked, Do you feel betrayed? He shook his head. No, I feel replaced, and that's freedom. When he walked off the podium, the applause felt different, less like celebration, more like respect. With his days suddenly open, Derek accepted a teaching fellowship at a small Midwestern college. His classes were packed within a week. Students expected stories about fame. He gave them homework instead. Design a system that can't be corrupted, he told them. One student groaned. That's impossible. Exactly, Derek said. Now start figuring out why. He spent nights grading papers, eating cafeteria food, walking campus trails. The anonymity felt like oxygen. Once, a freshman approached him nervously. Professor Coleman, were you really that guy on TV years ago? He smiled. I still am, just quieter. Then came the invitation he couldn't ignore. An international forum in South Africa, honoring pioneers of social innovation. He accepted, reluctantly, promising himself he'd stay out of the spotlight. But when he arrived, he saw banners with his name in bold letters. The host asked him to close the event with a message to the next generation. Standing at the podium, he looked out over the audience, students, activists, leaders, each holding phones ready to record. He took a breath. When I was younger, I thought the opposite of corruption was honesty. Now I know it's humility. The moment you believe you're untouchable, you've already fallen. The crowd fell silent. Then applause swelled until it shook the hall. Afterward, a boy approached him shyly. Sir, my mother says you gave us light in our village. Derek smiled. No, son. You gave it to yourselves. I just reminded you where the switch was. Back home, he received a call from Ethan. They want to rename the Media Fairness Act after you, Ethan said. Derek laughed softly. Tell them no. My story already has enough titles. Ethan chuckled. You know, I used to envy your calm. Now I just admire it. It's not calm, Derek said. It's acceptance. Power's loud. Purpose whispers. Years later, when Derek turned 50, Detroit held a ceremony dedicating the new National Renewable Research Center in his honor. He stood quietly at the back as younger engineers cut the ribbon. His father couldn't attend, age had slowed him, but sent a short note read aloud by the mayor. He learned that light without truth is just decoration. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing Derek smiling through tears. Later, alone in the building's hallway, he traced his fingers over a plaque engraved with his name. For a moment, he saw not fame, but faces the thousands who had believed when he was just a voice in a storm. Tyrone appeared beside him holding coffee. You ever get tired of being a symbol? Derek smiled. Symbols don't get tired. People do. Luckily, I'm both. That night, the city was quiet. From his porch, he watched the skyline hum like a living heartbeat. Every window glowed with a piece of what he'd started. Every street lamp a small testimony that truth could outlast slander, politics, and even exhaustion. He looked down at the old radio he'd fixed as a boy, still sitting on the table beside him. It flickered once, then came alive with static before settling into a soft gospel tune. Samuel had passed it on to him before moving into assisted care, calling it the sound that started it all. Derek leaned back, eyes half closed, whispering to himself, "Still working." The radio crackled, then cleared, as if agreeing. And somewhere across the ocean, in a village powered by his open-source grid, a child turned on a lamp to finish. Her homework, never knowing the man who made it possible, had just decided to rest, finally content to let the world keep shining without him. The next morning, the first sunlight crept through Derek Coleman's living room window and landed on the old radio still humming softly on the table. He had fallen asleep in the chair beside it, wrapped in a blanket his mother had crocheted decades earlier. The air was quiet except for the low buzz of Detroit's solar grid outside, a sound that had become the city's heartbeat. Tyrone knocked gently and let himself in, carrying 2 coffees. "You awake, boss?" Derek stirred, stretching slowly. "Barely." "You're gonna want to be," Tyrone said, handing him a tablet. "They just announced it. The Nobel Committee nominated you for the Peace Prize." For a long moment, Derek just stared, the words blurring on the screen. "Peace Prize," he repeated softly, half amused. "For a man who argued with half the world." Tyrone grinned. "Guess honesty finally pays in cash and medals." Derek smiled faintly. "Peace doesn't come from prizes, Ty. It comes from people turning on their own light switches without asking permission." Still, the nomination changed everything. Reporters camped outside his home again. Politicians scrambled to associate themselves with his name. Universities rushed to claim they'd inspired his journey. And though Derek politely declined interviews, the noise returned with the same intensity he'd once dismantled. On live TV. That night he called Ethan. "You heard?" Derek asked. "I did," Ethan said, his tone proud. "About time the world caught up." "Funny," Derek murmured. "I feel like I just got called back to the courtroom I thought I left behind," Ethan laughed. "Then give them one last closing argument." Weeks passed before the official ceremony in Oslo. Derek nearly turned it down. But Samuel, frail now, called from his hospital bed. "Go, son," he rasped. "They're not giving you a trophy. They're giving you the microphone one more time. Use it." So he went. The auditorium was filled with heads of state and journalists. Cameras flashed as Derek walked to the podium in a simple gray suit, the same one he'd worn the night he first confronted Ethan Walker years earlier. He looked out over the crowd, then began. "I once told a man that bias hides best when it's disguised as curiosity," he said. "What I've learned since is that truth hides too. It hides in fatigue, in compromise, in the polite silence that asks us to be smaller for the comfort of others. But peace doesn't grow in silence. It grows in sound, honest sound. The hum of progress, the buzz of ideas, the voices that refuse to apologize for being right too soon." The audience rose to its feet. His father's name flashed briefly on the screen behind him. Samuel Coleman, whistleblower, 1974. Derek nodded toward, "It ain't." He told the truth and disappeared. I told the truth and went viral. Both cost something, but the price is always worth the receipt. After the speech, dignitaries queued to shake his hand. He smiled politely, but inside he felt only stillness. The prize wasn't triumph, it was closure. When he returned home, Samuel was waiting in the hospital, eyes bright but body frail. "You did it," he whispered. "We did," Derek said, squeezing his hand. "Promise me something," his father said. "Don't spend your life defending your past. Spend it designing their future." "I promise," Derek said quietly. Samuel nodded once, smiled, and drifted into sleep he never woke from. The funeral was small, private. Derek spoke only once. My father's silence protected me. My voice protected him. Between us lived a truth that finally got to breathe. When the service ended, he placed the Nobel medal inside the casket. He earned it first, he whispered. Grief changes people, even those used to carrying the world. Derek withdrew from public life for months. He stopped traveling, stopped lecturing, stopped answering calls. Detroit kept humming without him. That was the point. One evening, Ethan showed up unannounced. You hiding or healing? He asked. Both, Derek said. Ethan sat across from him. The commission wants to establish a global ethics school. They want you to lead it. I'm done leading, Derek said. Every time I do, someone builds a statue before the lesson's over. Then teach quietly, Ethan said. No cameras, no titles, just a classroom. Derek looked up. What would we call it? Ethan smiled. The Truth Workshop. Within a year, the first Truth Workshop opened in Detroit. Students from 20 countries enrolled, learning how to design technology guided by moral reasoning, not profit. There were no degrees, only commitments. Derek taught the first session himself. He began with a single question written on the board. What does your invention owe the world? The students hesitated, then debated for hours. He listened, smiling quietly, the way Clarence Boyd had once listened to him. When class ended, one student approached. Professor, do you really think honesty can be taught? He considered the question. No, he said, but it can be remembered, and that's enough. Years slipped by. The workshops multiplied 20 cities, then 50. Journalists occasionally tried to pull him back into the spotlight, but he always declined. Fame is an echo, he told one interviewer. It's proof you shouted once. I'm busy listening, now. On the 10th anniversary of the first TV confrontation that had started it all, Ethan convinced him to film one final interview, a conversation, not for ratings, but for record. They sat across from each other in the same studio where it had begun. The set looked smaller now, almost intimate. Ethan smiled. Feels strange being back here. It does, Derek said softly. But maybe this time we finished the conversation. Ethan leaned forward. If you could go back to that night, would you do anything differently? Derek thought for a long time. I'd wear the same suit, speak the same words, and let the same silence fall when the crowd didn't know whether to clap or think. Because that silence taught America more than applause ever could. Ethan nodded. Do you think the world's better now? Derek smiled faintly. Better? No, but it's brighter. That's a start. When the cameras turned off, the two men sat in the quiet hum of the studio. Ethan reached out his hand. You changed my life. Derek shook it firmly. You helped me prove why it needed changing. They both laughed softly, the tension of history dissolving into peace. In the years that followed, Derek's hair silvered, but his conviction never dulled. He retired from EcoFuse completely, donating his shares to community foundations. The company thrived without him, run by engineers who'd once been his students. Detroit became the clean energy capital of America, its skyline a monument not to wealth but to willpower. One night, as he walked through the city's annual light festival, a teenage boy approached him shyly. Excuse me, sir. My mom says, you're the reason she could start her shop downtown. She said you made the power free for a while after the flood. Derek smiled. Your mom did the hard part, she rebuilt. The boy grinned. She told me to tell you something. What's that? She said. Tell him the lights never went out again. Derek's throat tightened. He nodded, patting the boy's shoulder. Then tell her that's the only reward I ever wanted. Years later, the Truth Workshop's 50th branch opened in Atlanta. The ceremony drew thousands of young engineers, activists, and dreamers. Derek, now in his 70s, was invited to cut the ribbon. He stepped up slowly, still tall but moving more deliberately. I used to think invention was about solving problems, he told the crowd. Now I know it's about remembering who you're solving them for. He looked out over the sea of faces, black, white, brown, Young, old, all lit by the soft glow of the lights they'd helped build. "I don't need to tell you what truth." He said. "You're standing in it." The crowd erupted, chanting his name until his voice was swallowed by the noise. He smiled, stepped back and whispered to Tyrone, who stood nearby. "When they stop chanting, make sure they start building again." That evening, back home, Derek sat on the porch one last time. The same chair, the same old radio, the same Detroit skyline now brighter than ever. Tyrone joined him holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You ever wonder how different things would have been if that TV host hadn't tried to humiliate you?" Derek chuckled softly. "He didn't humiliate me. He introduced me to my purpose," Tyrone nodded. "You think he knows that?" "I think he's known it for years," Derek said. They sat in comfortable silence. Crickets chirped. The hum of solar panels mixed with the rhythm of passing trains. Derek closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "You hear that?" he asked. "Hear. What?" "That's what peace sounds like. No applause, no argument, just continuity." Tyrone smiled. "You sure you don't want to write a book? The world would read it." "Maybe I already have," Derek said, gesturing toward the glowing skyline. "Every rooftop's a page." When Tyrone left, Derek stayed a while longer, letting the night deepen. He picked up the old radio again and turned the dial. The static faded into a familiar voice, Ethan Walker, older now, hosting a memorial broadcast honoring pioneers of truth in media. "And somewhere tonight, if you look toward Detroit, you'll see the proof that one voice can light 1,000 streets," Ethan said on air. "Derek Coleman taught us that the real revolution isn't in rebellion, it's in rebuilding." Derek smiled. "Still listening," he whispered. He placed the radio back on the table and leaned back, eyes closing as the music carried through the night, a song of persistence, not perfection. The lights of Detroit flickered softly in rhythm, and somewhere in a classroom, a student traced his name on a blackboard under the words, "Truth is the only renewable energy." The seasons in Detroit had a rhythm Derek Coleman could measure in light. Summers hummed bright and steady. Winters glowed with the muted gold of reflection. The city he'd once dreamed of reviving now powered itself without permission, proof that ideas didn't need their creator to keep breathing. At 74, Derek moved slower, but his mind still sparked like the grids he'd designed. The world called him the father of ethical innovation. He preferred simpler titles: teacher, builder, son. He spent his mornings walking through the streets that had changed more than he ever expected. Murals of eco-fuse panels decorated every other wall, and children no longer asked who he was. They only pointed at the lights and said he made those work. That, he thought, was enough. Legacy wasn't fame. It was functionality. One cold morning, Tyrone Ellis met him outside the Truth Workshop downtown. "Big day," he said, grinning. "They're renaming the campus after you." Derek shook his head. "They promised not to." "They broke that promise," Tyrone said with a laugh. "But this time it's a good kind of corruption." Inside, banners read, "The Derek Coleman Institute for Ethical Engineering." Students lined the hallways holding notebooks and digital tablets, waiting to hear him speak. He took the stage slowly, nodding to familiar faces, graduates who now led energy programs around the world. The applause was thunderous, but he held up his hand and the room fell silent. "I spent half my life being interrupted," he began. "First by doubt, then by arrogance, then by success pretending to be wisdom. If you take anything from me, let it be this. Innovation without introspection becomes destruction disguised as progress. Don't let your brilliance outrun your conscience." He paused, scanning the crowd. "When you build something that changes lives, remember those lives will one day outgrow you. Let them." The room stayed quiet, reverent. A few students wiped their eyes. "Now," he added softly, "go prove that light can still surprise the dark." When he finished, the crowd erupted, chanting his name until he waved them down, laughing. All right, back to work. World's still got voltage to spare." That evening, as the celebration continued around him, Derek slipped out quietly. The air outside was crisp, the sunset melting into orange fire across the skyline. He walked alone down Jefferson Avenue, past the same corner diner where he used to meet Andre in the early days of EcoFuse. Inside, the counter and jukebox were unchanged. He took his old seat, ordered coffee, and smiled when the waitress, now gray-haired herself, recognized him. "Haven't seen you in ages," she said. "Still saving the world?" He chuckled, trying not to overcharge it. She laughed, poured his cup, and said, "My grandson's studying engineering because of you. He says truth is a form of math." Derek looked up, eyes glinting. "Smart kid. He's right. It adds up." They shared a warm silence. Outside, the neon sign flickered, a small failure in an otherwise perfect circuit. Derek pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket, stepped outside, and tightened the wiring until the light steadied. Passers-by applauded softly. He smiled and tipped his cap. "Old habits," he said. Later that night, he returned home. The house was simple, lined with books, prototypes, and faded photographs. On the wall hung a framed copy of the headline from that first explosive night on the exchange. "Black entrepreneur calls out TV. Host leaves America stunned." He hadn't framed it for pride, but as a reminder. Everything started with a question disguised as insult. He sat by the window, turning on the old radio once again. Ethan Walker's voice filled the room. Older now, softer, broadcasting his final program before retirement. "Tonight," Ethan said, "we close our series with one story that changed not just my career but the country's moral compass. Years ago, a man sat across from me and refused to let my words define him. Instead, he defined what truth could look like under pressure. Derek Coleman taught us that the sharpest rebuttal isn't anger, it's composure. And the loudest victory is stillness after justice." Derek chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "You finally got the wording right, old friend." He listened until the show faded into music. For a long time, he simply sat there, letting the years wash over him, the noise, the lights, the laughter, the losses. Everything had folded into this calm moment, a quiet detente between the man and the movement he'd become. A week later, Ethan visited Detroit for the first time in years. They met at the park near the riverfront, where EcoFuse had built a memorial garden powered entirely by community solar. Small plaques lined the walkway, each engraved with the names of students, engineers, and truth-tellers lost along the way. Ethan bent to read one inscription aloud. "Lena Harris. She built the future with borrowed tools." He smiled softly. "I remember her story from your scholarship program." "She earned more than a scholarship," Derek said. "She earned legacy." They walked in silence for a while until Ethan stopped, looking at him. "You ever think about how all this started? A camera, a bad question, a few seconds of courage?" Derek nodded. "Funny thing about courage, it doesn't feel like courage when you're doing it. Feels like necessity." Ethan exhaled, glancing around. "The world's quieter now." "That's because we stopped shouting," Derek said. "Doesn't mean it's asleep." Before they parted, Ethan handed him an envelope. "I wrote something. Thought you'd want to see it before I publish." Derek unfolded the paper. It was an essay titled "The Man Who Taught America to Breathe Between Questions." He smiled. "Still poetic. Still learning from you," Ethan said. "Always will be." They shook hands one last time, both knowing it might be the last. The next morning, Derek walked to his father's old resting place outside the city. The grass had grown tall around the headstone. He knelt, brushing away the leaves, and placed a small solar lamp beside it. "Still keeping your promise," he whispered. The lamp flickered on automatically, its faint light steady against the early dawn. "Your truth built mine. Now it powers theirs." He stayed there a long time, remembering everything: the boy fixing a broken radio, the man dismantling prejudice on live television, the teacher who taught humility louder than applause. As he once stood to leave, he felt a sudden sharp chill, then an overwhelming calm. It wasn't pain, it was release. That evening, Tyrone stopped by Derek's house to drop off mail. He found the porch light on and the radio playing softly, the same song from years ago. Derek sat in his chair, peaceful, eyes closed, a faint smile frozen on his face. Tyrone stood there for a long moment before whispering, "Rest, boss. You kept the current flowing." Word spread quietly the next day. There were no parades, no grand announcements, just a wave of candlelight vigils across cities powered by his dream. Ethan delivered a brief eulogy on national television. Derek Coleman didn't change the world with speeches or anger. He changed it with calibration. He adjusted us until we functioned better. And now the world hums because one man refused to let it short-circuit. Months later, the city council unveiled a statue downtown, Derek seated on a bench, holding a blueprint in one hand and a light bulb in the other. But beneath his name, the inscription read exactly what he'd once told a classroom of students. "Truth is the only renewable energy." Children touched the bronze and smiled. Tourists took photos, but those who had known him simply nodded, feeling the steady warmth of the city glowing above them. Every panel and street lamp a silent continuation of his work. Years passed. The radio broadcasts replayed every year on his birthday. Students at the Institute read his lectures aloud to new generations. And every time a community grid came online somewhere in the world, the engineers would sign the installation plaque with 3 letters. DC, not for Derek Coleman alone, but for direct current, the unending flow of light he had embodied. Decades later, as technology advanced and cities became cleaner and quieter, historians agreed that Derek's confrontation on live TV had been the spark that rewired modern ethics. University courses taught the Coleman Standard, the measure of how truth should be handled under pressure. Nations modeled their transparency policies after his methods. But in Detroit, where it all began, the people simply said, "He gave us power and told us what to do with it." Every year on the anniversary of that first televised debate, the city dimmed its lights for 60 seconds. When they came back on, you could hear children cheering from windows, the sound of laughter spilling into the streets, and one phrase echoing through the night: "He kept his promise." And somewhere in that glow, in every pulse of light, in every honest word spoken aloud, the legacy of Derek Coleman remained unbroken, steady, and infinite.